Oh, hello, Teddy. Can I talk to you about your vehicle's extended warranty? You don't drive? What about your overdue taxes? If you go to Walmart, you can pay us in 47 Google Play cards. No? Let's talk about other scams. What about FTP? Why, hello there, endurance nerds. If you spent the last year chasing FTP gains like they're Bitcoin in 2013, well, I have some hard truths and recovery shake of humility to serve you. Because today, we're tackling one of cycling's most sacred cows, and dare I say it, one of its biggest traps, the obsessive, myopic, and occasionally cult-like devotion to functional threshold power.
Wait, shut your mouth. Shut your mouth.
I'm sorry? What did you
You're just coming off stupid.
Now, don't get me wrong, FTP matters, it's useful, but it is not the holy grail. And if your entire training plan revolves around pushing that number up at all costs, chances are that you've plateaued, overcooked, or might be slowly becoming allergic to your bike.
I'm sorry, I'm allergic to bullshit.
But let's back up the bus here and remind the class of the basics. Because while most of you probably think that you understand what FTP is, I'm willing to bet that a few of you are carrying around some well-intentioned but totally incorrect beliefs. And honestly, that's not on you. I blame the communicators in this space, some of whom don't fully grasp the concept themselves, and others who know it cold but forget that not everyone shares their vocabulary, so they take shortcuts. They oversimplify. And suddenly we've got a generation of cyclists believing that it's the power at which you explode after 1 hour, or that it somehow represents your maximum effort, or worse, that raising it by 5 watts will fix everything from your race results to your self-worth. We're not doing a full biochem deep dive today, but we are going to start from a clear, shared definition so that the rest of this actually makes sense. FTP stands for functional threshold power, and it's best understood as a field-based proxy for your second lactate threshold, or LT2. You will often see this referred to as maximal lactate steady state, or MLSS. Now, technically, these are not the exact same thing. LT2 is the point at which your blood lactate begins to rise rapidly, and MLSS is the highest intensity where lactate levels can remain stable over time. But the window between these values is so short as to be negligible, usually a handful of watts. So for most practical training purposes, we can treat them as functionally interchangeable, especially given that most of our testing is done in a field setting where we're not hooked up to lab equipment or getting poked for blood every 4 minutes to get that level of granularity that we need. So it really becomes a distinction without a difference. So yes, if you're one of those physiology nerds out there yelling at your screen right now, I see you. But for the rest of the normies out there, this is the threshold that separates the hard but sustainable from I hope you brought a bucket. And that brings us to one of the major misconceptions about FTP. FTP is not a maximal effort, it's submaximal. It's not how hard you can go for a sustained period on rage and caffeine, it's the peak aerobic power you can sustain for roughly an hour, assuming that you have the fitness to support it. You'll often hear this termed as your maximum 1 hour power. And while this is broadly true, it's a bit lazy as a definition, and it leads to some confusion and insecurity in a lot of athletes. The more precise way to describe FTP is as the highest power that you can sustain without producing more lactate than your body can clear. Essentially the tipping point before metabolic chaos. That 1 hour benchmark isn't because FTP equals your 1 hour max, it's because that duration roughly aligns with the intensity where lactate production and clearance are in a shaky balance. In reality, almost no one tests FTP with a full 60-minute effort anymore. It's brutal, it's inefficient, and it's demoralizing. But we still reference that hour because it represents a physiological tipping point. Too short, and anaerobic power can skew the data, and too long, and you're measuring fatigue resistance and not threshold. So we use smarter testing methods with the goal of estimating the power that you can hold for about that hour if your aerobic system and muscular endurance were dialed in. It's not the duration that matters. It's what that duration reveals. The highest power that you can sustain without lactate accumulation shutting you down. And here's the twist. Many, if not most athletes, can't actually hold their FTP for a full hour. That doesn't mean their FTP is wrong. In fact, a lab test might confirm that their LT2 is spot on. But without the aerobic base, muscular endurance, and fatigue resistance to support that effort duration, they simply won't get there. And that's a bit of a teaser for what's ahead in this video. But let me say this now. Even some pros can't hold their FTP for an hour, and they don't need to. Hell, for most of you amateurs out there, it's not likely practical for your goals to prioritize chasing that type of power execution either. Yet so many people get wrapped around the axle with this
if you can't hold it for an hour, it's not your FTP
garbage. So this 1 hour power branding, I find it a bit misleading and not particularly helpful for most athletes. It creates more confusion than it does clarity. Now, whether we care about that 1 hour moniker or not, we want to know that number, right? And decades ago, Dr. Andy Coggan developed a means of finding it without a lab test or a blood lactate pinprick from the back of a team car. To be clear, it's an estimate, a good one, but an estimate nonetheless. The protocols have evolved over the years, but these days, most people get it from something like a 20-minute test, where you ride at your max sustainable effort for 20 minutes and then apply a fudge factor, generally taking about 95% of the average power. Then there's a ramp test, where your soul is extracted 1 minute at a time until you can't continue, and FTP is back calculated as 75% of your final 1 minute power. Or softwares can reverse engineer your threshold from historical data, some math, and a healthy dose of blind optimism. There are some other formats out there, but these are generally the ones you're going to see most commonly. And each method works well enough, but none of them are flawless. The 20-minute test tends to overestimate FTP in riders with a strong anaerobic engine, those who can tap into their anaerobic capacity to elevate their average power even as lactate accumulates well beyond what they could sustainably clear long term. If that same effort were protracted, they'd likely fall apart well before the hour mark, often even before 30 minutes. The ramp test, on the other hand, often underestimates FTP in diesel engine or smaller riders who lack explosive power and fade early in the ramp, even if they could hold steady efforts near threshold for ages. And even the best modeled FTP can get it wrong if your data isn't recent, diverse, or well distributed across durations, like if your curve is missing long steady efforts or short punchy ones that help to anchor the endpoints. But the really important piece to remember is why this even matters. Why do we even care about FTP or LT2 in the first place? We're not chasing it for vanity, or at least we shouldn't be, and it's not just a number to flash like a badge or glance at as a warning light on the dashboard. We're trying to identify that critical point where lactate production and clearance are balanced in a fragile truce. Not to impress anyone on the group ride, but to structure our training intelligently, to build on our strengths and to shore up the weaknesses in our power curve. This is exactly why FTP anchors our training zones. It sits near the top of our zone 4 and acts as that dividing line for training different energy systems. Endurance work lands well below it, sweet spot and threshold efforts hug close to it, and VO2 max and anaerobic intervals shoot far above it. Without a solid estimate of your FTP, your zones are just educated guesses, and the precision of your training suffers. I've got a full video that breaks down all of the power zones in detail, so I'm going to leave that link down below. But think of FTP as your training compass. It's not a destination, but a reference point, like the equator. It doesn't tell you where to go, but it helps you to understand where you are. And yet many cyclists treat FTP like a personality test. Hi, I'm a 255 watt threshold with avoidant recovery tendencies and a strong fear of zone 2. It's a number, a useful one, but not the only one, and certainly not the one that you want to pin your entire identity to. And that brings us to why FTP becomes a trap. FTP feels addictive because at first it climbs fast. You start structured training, clean up your effort distribution, and bam, 30 watts in a month. You feel like you've unlocked a cheat code. But here's the wrinkle. Those early gains, they're beginner candy. Easy to grab, easy to love, and then they dry up. As your training age increases, usually beyond about that 3-year mark for most athletes, FTP gains slow way down. That's normal. But instead of zooming out, people often double down. More threshold work, more ramp tests, more 2x20s until their soul quietly evaporates. Why? Because FTP is visible. It gives you a number to chase. It's baked into your app, your smart trainer, and your ego. And that's the problem. It's easy to measure, but it's not always worth measuring. Meanwhile, your sprint power is flatlining, your VO2 max hasn't moved in a year, and you get dropped late in rides. But your FTP, hey, it's still 275, baby. Welcome to the plateau. Population, most of us. So what should you really be looking at? Once your FTP levels off, and it will, you need to stop chasing wattage like it's a lottery jackpot and start tracking the stuff that actually matters to performance. Let's talk through some of those key metrics that you should be tracking and how to do it without needing a sports science lab in your basement. First is your power curve development. Your power duration curve maps what you can hold all the way from 5 seconds to 5 hours. It's your real power profile, not just the FTP cherry on top. Platforms like intervals.icu, Training Peaks, and WKO5 can model this curve using historical ride data, especially if you've done a variety of hard efforts across duration. But if your curve is flat or incomplete, the software can only guess. That's where critical power testing can come in. You can perform these tests in the wild, doing maximal efforts at key durations like 3, 5, 12, or 20 minutes, or use structured workouts designed by coaches or baked into many of our platforms that we use to target those efforts cleanly. A few maximal intervals in the right spots can give you a much more accurate view of where your strengths and weaknesses actually lie. If your sprint, 3-minute and 90-minute powers are improving, even if your FTP refuses to budge, you're evolving. Your curve is getting stronger. That is the real progress. Next is repeatability. Fitness isn't one big effort. It's the ability to do hard work again and again and again when everyone else is cooked and wondering why their legs have stopped responding. Repeatability reflects your capacity to recover between high-intensity efforts and still hit meaningful power outputs. This is especially critical in race scenarios, fast group rides, or hard events where surges, climbs, or attacks don't happen in isolation, they come in waves. You can look at how many quality intervals you can hit in a session. Can you hit 400 watts for 3 minutes 5 times with short recovery? Or do you peak once and then crater into zone 2 by the 3rd rep? If it's the latter, congratulations. You might have a solid FTP test result, but you don't have a functional engine yet. and that's what you actually want to build. Structured workouts with repeatable intervals like 4x4s, over-unders, VO2 max sets with limited rest, they're all great ways to track this. And you're not just training your peak power, you're training your resilience. Then there's durability. Durability is your ability to produce meaningful power deep into a ride when glycogen is low, fatigue is set in, and your body's been whispering "nap" for the last 40 miles. Anyone can hit threshold power on fresh legs. FTP when you're fresh is cute. FTP when you've already been pedaling for 3 hours, dodging potholes, missing bottles, and mentally bargaining with your quads, that's fitness. Durability reflects how well you can maintain output under cumulative fatigue, and it plays a major role in events, things like gravel races, fondos, stage races, or even just back-end group ride heroics. If your power falls apart in the final hour, you might not have a fueling problem, you likely have a durability problem. One of the best ways to build and assess this is to insert intervals, things like tempo, sweet spot, or even threshold at the end of your long ride. If your watts hold steady and your form doesn't fall to pieces, congratulations, you're becoming very hard to kill. But next is efficiency. Efficiency means producing the same output at a lower physiological cost. It's not flashy, but it's one of the most reliable indicators that your aerobic engine is improving. Let's say that you're doing your endurance rides at 180 watts. Early in your base training, your heart rate might be sitting at 145 beats per minute. A few months of discipline later, same ride, same power, but now your heart rate is at 130. That's not a fluke. That's aerobic adaptation in action. More oxygen delivered, more fat oxidized, more work for less strain. One of the easiest ways to track this is to watch your heart rate during long, steady efforts. You can look at your cardiac drift, or lack thereof, over those longer efforts to see how you fare as that duration creeps upward. I have a full video on heart rate that I'm going to link down below if you want to understand more about how heart rate works. But tools like Training Peaks or intervals.icu can go harder in the paint if you'd like and let you monitor PA or PW to HR ratio, and that's your power to heart rate decoupling. It compares your efficiency factor, or the ratio of your normalized power for a ride to your heart rate between the first half and the second half of your ride. And when that number is low, let's say under 5%, you're staying efficient across the duration of the ride. If it's significantly above that, your body is starting to strain to hold the same watts. Lower heart rate at the same power, or lower cardiac drift, means more durability. That's the kind of invisible gain that doesn't necessarily show up on a leaderboard, but makes everything feel easier, giving you more reach when it matters. Now, another big one is time to exhaustion, or TTE. Two riders with a 260 watt FTP are not equal if one can hold it for 62 minutes and the other folds at 35. On paper, same threshold, but in reality, one of them is still pedaling while the other one is contemplating hiding in the bushes and faking GI distress. That's where TTE comes in. TTE measures how long you can hold your FTP before fatigue forces you to back off. I hinted at this before when I talked about how many athletes can't actually hold their FTP for an hour. This is the major component. TTE reflects a combination of your aerobic fitness, muscular endurance, and metabolic resilience. A higher TTE doesn't just mean you can suffer longer, it means that your FTP is more usable. Tools like WKO5 or intervals.icu can help you to model this based on your existing power data, assuming that you've got enough steady efforts in your history. Or you can go full traditionalist and do a long, steady threshold effort outdoors or on the trainer until you just can't hold it anymore. Warning, this method is brutally honest, occasionally demoralizing, and often sticky. But if you can push your TTE up without necessarily raising FTP, you're expanding your capacity to perform at high intensity. That's the difference between having a number and actually being able to use it when it counts. And of course, we cannot forget watts per kilogram. Yes, FTP contributes directly to your WKG, and yes, that ratio matters, especially when the road tilts upward. In climbing scenarios, a higher WKG is often the difference between staying with the front group or watching them vanish around a switchback. But it's important to understand that WKG is a result, not a goal in isolation. The per kilogram part should come from reducing excess adiposity, not stripping away lean mass or sabotaging your strength just to see a lower number on the scale. If you're losing weight, but also losing watts, your ratio not improve, and even if it does, your performance might not. A lighter rider with the same power will climb faster. A rider who's just lighter won't. And while we're being precise, time trialists and riders in flat terrain benefit more from raw watts and aerodynamics than WKG. Reducing body mass helps only if you maintain power. The moment you compromise force production or fatigue resistance, you're trading watts for vanity, and that's a bad trade. So yes, track WKG and train for it when your goal demands it, but remember, performance isn't just about pushing that ratio ever higher. It's about building a power profile that's resilient, repeatable, and durable, and then refining your body composition in a way that supports that. The best riders aren't the lightest. They're the ones that can produce meaningful watts at the moments that matter for their size, for their goals, and under fatigue. Now, depending on your or your coach's proclivity to deep dive your data, there's a whole litany of other metrics and even intangibles, things like rate of perceived exertion that you can track. This list is by no means exhaustive, but I do think it covers the big hitters that can get most of you started. And once you break free of the FTP cult, it's time to train like an actual cyclist, not a lab rat. Whether you build your own plan, use one from one of our beloved online platforms, or have a coach, I want to give you some broad strokes to look out for in your plan. I'm not going to go into specific periodization or structure here. I will link some of my more focused videos below for that. But in general terms, here's what delivers real return on training investment. First, let's bang that drum. Zone 2. Real Zone 2. This is low-intensity aerobic work, the kind that builds your engine from the inside out. It makes you more efficient, metabolically flexible, and resilient over time. If you're sneaking in a tempo because your ego can't handle easy, you're just burning matches that should have stayed in the box. Ride slow to go fast is not a slogan. It's biology. And here's the kicker. This should make up the bulk of your plan. In most mesocycles, especially base and general build, 60 to 80% of your weekly training time should be in Zone 2. If your calendar is wall-to-wall with intervals, spicy group rides, and back-to-back sweet spot blocks with no true aerobic work, that's not structure, that's chaos and lycra. Look for long rides, structured aerobic days, and recovery sessions that respect the need for contrast. If you don't see that balance, someone either doesn't understand physiology or they just dragged and dropped workouts into the calendar to make it look busy. Then there's a fan favorite, VO2 max work. Threshold doesn't rise unless your ceiling does, and VO2 max is that ceiling. If your aerobic capacity is tapped out, there's no room for FTP to grow. So yes, this work matters, even if it sucks. You're looking for intervals in that 3 to 6 minute range, typically between 110 to 120% of FTP with full recovery between efforts. These are not threshold efforts in disguise. They should feel uncomfortable, ragged, and borderline rude. That's the point. In a well-structured plan, you'll usually see 1 to 2 VO2 max sessions per week, often in that build phase and maintenance phase. More than that, you're probably digging a hole. Less than that, and you're just hoping your ceiling magically expands. If your training plan has VO2 max slapped on a ride, but it's just 4 by 8 minutes at sweet spot with no recovery, that's not intensity. It's false advertising. Now let's talk sprint training. Even if you never toe the start line, sprinting matters. It trains neuromuscular coordination, leg speed, and explosive power. And that transfers across your whole power curve, from attacking climbs to closing gaps. This is the high-octane fuel that most endurance plans completely ignore. You absolutely do not need a whole workout dedicated to sprinting. Just toss in 4 to 6 all-out 8 to 12-second efforts during a Zone 2 ride with plenty of spinning in between. You're training your brain and muscles to fire fast and hard, not grinding out max power under fatigue. A good plan will include sprint primers weekly or bi-weekly, especially in those early build or maintenance phases. But if your entire calendar is just threshold repeats and tempo blocks, that's not specificity. That's neglect. Don't skip this just because you're not a sprinter. You weren't a cyclist once either. Now the next one is often overlooked, and that's torque and muscular endurance. If you want to climb better, time trial stronger, or push into a headwind without immediately hoping to double flat and catch a ride home, then you need more than cadence. You need torque. That's about teaching your legs to push hard, not just spin fast. That means big gear work at low cadences, usually in the 50 to 60 RPM range, ideally at sweet spot or threshold intensity. You'll see formats like 2x10, 3x12, or 4x8 minutes, depending on your phase and the goal, but the key is pressure on the pedals, not speed. Good plans bake these into your base and build phases, often once per week. If your calendar is all spin and no strength, that's a red flag. Endurance without durability is just speed waiting to die on a hill. They're hard, they're weird, but they do work. And last but most certainly not least is fatigue resistance training. If you want to ride strong late in a race, or even just not fall apart halfway through your goal event, you have to train tired. Fresh leg heroics are fun for Instagram, but real fitness shows up in hour 4 when everyone else is cracking. Look for tempo or sweet spot work in the final hour of long rides, or back-to-back days where both sessions include structured intervals. This trains your ability to hit targets under load, exactly what you need on event day. Solid plans will start adding this in late base or early build phase, gradually increasing stress and specificity. If your plan has all the quality work front-loaded on fresh legs and nothing but coffee spins on the weekend, that's not endurance, that's avoiding adaptation. If you train smarter than that, your enemies will be amazed and annoyed, and they should be. But let's buckle in for a reality check. FTP is like your college GPA. Great early on, kind of useful later, but eventually irrelevant to your actual performance. Once you're within a few percent of your natural FTP ceiling, which is largely predicated by time availability, training age, and yes, genetics, gains become really expensive. We're talking major time investment for single watt returns. Meanwhile, building durability, repeatability, and aerobic capacity still gives you a great return. These are the gains that make you faster, not just higher scoring. Stop investing everything into a stock that's barely moving. You have to diversify your performance portfolio. So, to everyone staring down a plateau and panicking, relax. FTP isn't really dead, it's just done growing. And that's okay. What's not okay is ignoring everything else that makes you fast. So the next time your buddy brags about their FTP before a group ride, ask them how long they can actually hold it, or whether they've ever sprinted for anything besides a KOM that they didn't win. But drop a comment if you've been there. Stuck chasing threshold while the rest of your fitness stagnated. Hit the like button if you're ready to train like a complete human being, and share this video with the one person in your life that thinks FTP is a personality type. But thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.